Welcome back to another episode of Raising the Bar, TKJ Podcast. In this episode, we hear from Chelsea Hayes, founder of Ebenezer Hats. Chelsea is a dynamic entrepreneur and a community leader. She blends fashion and functionality to celebrate individuality. As a marketing professional at NMSU Alamogordo and a board member for the Alamogordo Chamber of Commerce and COPE, Chelsea leverages her expertise and connections to drive business success. Her ventures, including a chic boutique concept, embody her mission to make every person feel seen, confident, and stylish. Plan your steps and take flight. TKJE, Raising the Bar. Welcome back to another episode of Raising the Bar, TKJE Podcast. Today we hear from Chelsea Hayes, founder of Ebenezer Hats. How are you today, Chelsea?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you, Ken?
Fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. I'm excited to hear what you got going on. I know we met and had a conversation and really enjoyed that conversation and wanted to allow you to tell your story and kind of what you got going on. So when it comes to your business and what you're doing, tell us what inspired you to start your business.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. So, the story of Ebenezer Hats starts with me. I'm a candidate for my own business. I focus on silk line, fedora, wide brim hats for women and now also for men. I initially started the idea because I love wearing hats in general, but fedoras and even baseball hats, they don't always fit properly. So I would be, walking around, let's say it's a windy day, that thing's flying off. I embrace my friends with a hug, that thing is falling off. My pastor at my church always was like, all right, Chelsea, I got to hug you a certain way. Otherwise, that thing is going to fly right off. And I get wondering, I'm like, is there anyone out there who has fedoras in more inclusive sizing? And I couldn't find any. I mean, yes, there are custom hat makers out there and they are doing a great job, but you have to pay a premium to get your own custom made hat. And that's fine, but you're never going to really get another one like that if you just walk into a hat shop. Like you're going to see all these beautiful hats, but they're not going to fit someone who has thicker hair, braids like myself, dreadlocks, for example, and you just, you have to, go out of your way. So I thought, well, let me see if I can be the one to do it. And here we are, the hats are in production right now. So that's also very exciting.
Okay, now when we spoke before, you said you had done some research, which I thought was just really awesome. You had taken the time to kind of get a better idea of your market and kind of who you're going to be selling to and things of that nature. So I know there are a lot of challenges, and with business, you're going to have setbacks as well. So, how did you overcome your initial challenges and your setbacks as a startup company?
Yeah, great question. So in the beginning, as I did my research, I saw that like no one was making sizes larger than like 62 centimeters when it came to fedora wide brim hats. You might see like a 64, but like very rare. And I didn't think initially why people weren't doing that. I was just like, oh, they're not doing it. Okay. So as I connected with manufacturers, that's when I started to like realize like how difficult it could be, right? Because a lot of them are like, oh, we've never done any size bigger than 62 centimeters because they didn't see the need. They're like, oh, well, most people fit in 62 or less. But when I would show them like pictures of my head and like I would take the measuring tape and be like, yep, I'm 66 centimeters, they were like, oh, like really shocked. So, in a way, right, like I was learning, but they were learning too. And that was really a unique part of the experience. Initially, my business model, I was focused on just doing custom hats for everybody. I was like, oh, I'm just going to take everyone's measurements and it's going to be fine. But as I connect with these manufacturers, they also were like, yeah, that's going to be hard because unless I found a manufacturer here in the US who was willing to do it, it would be longer wait times, people, and sometimes, if my business model is focused on wholesale, right? Like I want people to just be able to buy them and get more when they want. that wasn't going to be as very successful. So I pivoted and I, was like, all right, let me collect people's measurements. So I went in and did a social media campaign on my social channels where I asked people to send me their measurements. And I did have a really good range of different measurements, which allowed me then to create a size tier system of like small, medium, medium, large, large XL. And from there, that really did like help build that up. So,
Okay, so the research came through time.
yeah.
And as far as you moving forward and, developing, growing your business, when it comes to scaling, what plans
Mhm.
do you have to scale your business as you develop, as you get more, maybe more product lines, things of that
Mhm.
nature? How do you plan on scaling?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So, one of the ways that I've been learning to scale even now is that since I don't have the hats, I have already been selling different products. So I've been selling silk scrunchies. So I actually have one in my hair right now. So they're silk and they have my logo on them. These are like the really big ones that I sell. I have really smaller ones too that I sell. And I realized I was like, oh yeah, because like silk really is such an important part of like your hair, right? Keeping that natural oils in your hair, reducing the frizz, reducing the breakage, all of those things. So, while I was, developing the hats, I was like, well, why not start selling, right? Because a lot of the time, right, we get in this mindset of like, oh, well, we can't sell until it's like perfect or until we have our product. But I was like, how am I going to get my name out there, if I don't like if I'm just like, oh, I'm just developing. And that took time. Like that took months, So I encouraged myself to just go in and start selling those silk scrunchies. And then from there, I also had people say to me, hey, Chelsea, like, have you ever thought about doing like silk bonnets and do rags? And I was like, nope, but I could, So, like, there's a lot of ways that I'm already scaling now in just the accessory parts of my business. And then with the hats, like, now I'm able to also sell to men. Originally, I was like, oh, I'm just going to sell to women because, women like fedoras. And then I had some male friends from my church being like, "Hey, we want one too." And I was like, "Okay, so let me talk to my manufacturer." And he was so willing. He was like, "Yeah, Chelsea." He was like, "We can make them for men too." He's like, "They're pretty much very similar in shape." And I was like, "Oh, didn't even know." So it's like I'm learning in this journey, but it's also about asking the right questions, right? And being willing to ask because the worst something or anyone is going to say is no. So,
I agree. I tell people, usually no doesn't hurt. So just you might as
right.
well ask. And
Hmm.
there's a possibility you can get the answer that you're
Hmm.
looking for. So definitely ask the question. Now,
Hmm.
earlier you mentioned the word pivot, and
Hmm.
many people struggle with that, having to make change. A lot of people
Hmm.
are really against changing, especially when it comes to their business. Can you
Hmm.
highlight a time when you had to pivot your business model and how you
Hmm.
executed the transition successfully as you
Hmm.
continued to move forward?
Yeah, great question. So for me, successfully pivoting was when I started, getting different design renderings of the hats. And then as I, connected with other people who are in the fashion industry, they were telling me, they're like, yeah, Chelsea, like custom hats, like that's really good, right? And they're like, we love the way your hat looks. We love that you're gonna put silk lining in it. They were like, it's very good. But they kept saying, they're like, well, how are you going to take custom orders? Like, are you trying to, hire a hat maker? And like I didn't even think about that. So hiring a hat maker is a salary. And as a startup, I don't have that funding just yet, right? Like I can source for that, but then that would cause me to still delay, delay, delay. So I thought, I'm like, okay, well, how can we, pivot here? That's when I put out for the social media campaign of just like, well, let's see what sizes people actually need, right? Because I know I need a size 66, but I don't know what my potential customers need. So putting out that business or social media campaign allowed me to connect with about 50 different people who said, okay, hey, this is my size. And generally, like I range in these areas. And I also showed people how to take their measurements. So that was really cool too, because, we can assume that people know those things, but it's better not to assume, especially in business. Go forth and just show them how to do it. So it makes it easier because we love our business, but to somebody else, like it's I think they call it like the crocodile brain, right? Where it's like they don't know. So make it as simple as possible, show them, and then you'll get the results. And I did. So with that, that allowed me to pivot my business model from I'm only doing custom hats for women to I'm doing uh, fedora wide brim hats with silk lining for women and for men. And here are the sizes that you can choose from. So
Oh, wow. Okay. Now,
thanks.
through that, you would also mention getting funding, and we all know in
Mhm.
business you're going to need some money. So,
Yes.
how have you been able to secure your funding? You mentioned crowdfunding and doing
Mhm.
some things on social media. So, how have you been able to secure the funding that you need to get started and the funding you need to
Mhm.
move forward and scale?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I used Kickstarter, which is pretty much almost in a way like reverse crowdfunding for businesses. What you do is you set up an account with them, you set up like how much funding you need. At the time, I was just looking to raise about like $1,300. And from there, Kickstarter will also make sure you set like a budget. So, in the sense of, okay, if you want to raise $1,300, you need to make sure that you get this many backers, and then also to include the fee, because there is a fee that Kickstarter does take for the funding that you make. So it just helps you set that up, which is really nice because, to me, I'm like, I just need this. So, so from there, once that all was set up, I was able to connect with just different people that I knew. I used social media because social media is huge, right? And I just talked about it. I was just like, here's what I'm going to use this funding for. I know sometimes people are like, you got to keep it a little bit to yourself. But honestly, the transparency that I kept of like, this is what I'm going to do with this funding. I'm going to be able to secure the sample hats for each of the hats that I'm trying to produce. And people loved it. They were like, yeah, we'll back it. And I mean, I was able to secure the funding about 2 days before my Kickstarter ended, which was so exciting. And yeah, it took some time like for the funding to land in my account officially, but I got it, and that is through determination, faith in God, and just pushing, and just telling people like, hey, this is, what I'm looking to do.
Okay, I'd never heard of that till I had met you actually. So,
Mhm.
using that resource was it showed to be proved to be successful, and when you started using it, do you find that, when you're starting a business, using resources like that may come in handy a little bit better than the traditional routes? What are your thoughts along that? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on
Yeah.
that.
So I do think it's worth doing. I mean, there's always going to be like, especially when you put yourself on social media, there's always going to be like scammers or things like that. So always beware of that. Like that's something I always, stress to people. It's like when you put yourself out there, just be, aware of scammers because that can happen. But the traditional way, I mean, if it works for you, don't stop doing it, right? Like, you know what I mean? You got to find what works for you in your business. But one thing I will say is that you just got to be willing to put yourself out there. That is with any way, whether you do the traditional route, whether you decide to do a Kickstarter campaign, whether decide to do a GoFundMe, however you decide to raise the money for your business, you just got to be willing to put yourself out there because if you don't, you're just going to be in your own bubble and maybe some of your friends and family might back you and that's great, right? But your friends and family are not your only clients. If you want to scale, you got to put yourself out there and you got to be, willing to have some people even criticize, your business or critique it, and give you that feedback because if you don't, how are you ever going to grow? So I hope that answers that question.
It absolutely does, and thank you for that feedback. I just want people to hear that and understand that, and I love the way you
Mhm,
said you have to put yourself out there so you can get
mhm,
those critiques or get that feedback. Now,
mhm,
tell us just one thing as a business owner that you've learned, that something that maybe is not taught in school. We learn things as business owners, and then we think about what is taught and what's not taught in schools. So, can you tell
mhm,
us one thing that you've learned as a business owner that is
mhm.
not taught in schools?
Yeah, one thing for sure that comes to mind is just start. Like, because a lot of times, right, and especially in like the traditional way, whether you go for like your, degree in business, whether it's your undergrad or your master's, a lot of times, like, they'll just give you like, "Well, start here, do this," right? But they won't really kind of get you to the like, it's okay if it's not beautiful in the beginning. Like, I remember I heard this one story. I can't remember the name of the company, but this one company, they started off with just selling like, one or two t-shirts on their site. And then they became the business that they are now. It's now like a household name. I just can't remember the name. But it's just like they had a one page website selling two t-shirts, and they tested that out and it worked, and then they scaled, they grew from that. So I think a lot of the times, we're like, well, if we don't apply everything, we're not going to be successful. And it's like, you can still apply things along the way, right? I think that's the big piece there, along the way. So just start, and then as you go and everything, you add in the things you've learned already, you put those things in place, and that's going to allow you to be successful.
Oh, I love it. Now, advice through time as you're in business, we hear advice or we read a book or we see something and we take that piece of advice and we move forward. Can you give our listeners one piece of business advice that has stuck with you on your journey?
See, yeah, it's a good question. So I think one piece of business advice that's I've gotten, at least, is that you you got to be okay with the unknown. You really got to be okay with it, because it's you're never going to know if you don't put yourself out there. You're never going to know if you don't test out that product. So you have to be okay with the unknown. And I'll even throw it back to that pivoting piece with change. You have to be okay with that, because Gucci and like Chanel and everything, like they didn't just start great, like they had to build, a lot of people didn't like their ideas, right? A lot of people hated their ideas, but look at them now, like a household name. And that's how we get there, by not being afraid to just put yourself out there, by not being afraid to change, all of that. When you just put your foot in front, keep walking. That's what I say.
Okay, perfect. Tell us how we can get a hold of you. Where can we learn about, what you're doing? Maybe people want to contribute to your business as you move forward. Where can we find you and how can we help you?
Yeah. So where you can find me, I am on Facebook, Instagram at Ebenezer Hats, literally all one word. I'm also on TikTok, and I am currently working on my website. It's currently under construction, but the link is ebenezerhats.com. You're going to see a coming soon page on there. I'm currently working on the back end of that. But yeah, in regards to just like how you can help me, I would just say, because the hats are being produced as of right now, it is a 30 to 45-day window for them to be made. And then from there, I will start taking pre orders. So just push the word out that if people are interested in being involved in my soft launch, they will be able to get 10% off their pre order with me. So that's huge. I'm only offering that to the folks who have given me their measurement. They get included in the soft launch, and they're going to also shop the pre-order first. So they'll get access first, and then, I'll have everybody else in there. So I say, if you're interested, check us out. So
That is awesome. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much for taking the time doing this interview. We learned a lot and many blessings and much success to you as you move forward. I really enjoyed hearing your story. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much, and we will definitely talk soon.
Sounds great. I really appreciate your time, and thank you, listeners.